Okay. If you haven't handed me the summer project yet, if you send it to me in July, by the end of July, I will give you feedback, um, and you can resubmit. So far, everyone who's handed it in has done a really good job, and they've got an A on the paper. So the big I'd say the big thing that some people get wrong are trade-offs that we talked about last week, where like people say, I went to Calvert Hall and my trade-off is I don't have my old friends. That's one of the things, but you got to list all the things like I have to travel in a car for 45 minutes. Um, I might have to practice sports or whatever the trade-offs are. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you about a minute to think about what you could tell me about the different points on the curve. And then by the curve also being, so what does A represent? What does B, D, and C represent? What does X represent? What does the bowed out curve represent? So I'll give you a minute to think about that, and I'll then open up the chat box and we could just discuss that in a second. Oh, okay. Okay, can anyone type in and tell me what A represents in this production possibilities curve? What does A represent? Inefficient, okay, inefficient use of resources. Excellent. So if you're in A, you're in a recession, you have high unemployment, you're not using your resources efficiently. B, D, and C, what does B, D, and C represent? Okay, efficient use of resource. Good, good. It's the efficient use of resources. Now, they're all equally efficient. One is not more efficient than the other. Um, if we were looking for economic growth, we want to produce more capital goods, which I wouldn't even consider guns capital goods, but all of them are efficient. And X, what does X represent? Okay, right. Unattainable, not currently possible with present day resources. That would take one of the four shifters, which would be change in quantity or quality of resources, change in technology, change in capital stock, meaning more machines, factories, things like that, and change in human resources, training. Now, the fact that the curve is bowed out, what does that tell you about this production possibilities curve? Okay, the resources are not directly related is true. Anything else? Opportunity cost changes. Okay, that's good. So you have increasing opportunity costs when it's bowed out. And the reason they are increasing is resources are not easily adaptable. So you guys did a great job teaming up to get to the right answer. Okay, if it was a straight line, let me just see by chance is the next slide. That would be very nice. If it is a straight line like this, then you have constant opportunity costs and resources are easily adaptable. Okay? But the same thing, U would be inefficient, A, B, C, D would all be efficient, L is unattainable with present day resources. Okay? Just a quick review from last week. All right, getting into some new stuff then for this week. How is economics used? There's two types of statements. There's a positive statement, which is based on facts. Okay, so a positive statement could be unemployment is 3.8%. A positive statement could be Calvert Hall has 1,230 students. All right, those are really not things that economists argue about. Those are things that are pretty much facts. The normative statement is more like opinionated values. So unemployment is 3.8%. That's the positive. The normative statement could be based on President Trump's economic policies. Okay, you could argue, is it his economic policies, but you can't argue the 3.8. Calvert Hall has 1,200 students. That's a fact. Calvert Hall gets more out of their students academically than any high school in the state of Maryland. That you could argue. All right. So those are the positive and normative statements. Now, here is something, and I should say, like the production possibilities curve and this absolute and comparative advantage, they are both micro and macro. So they're in both micro and macro. So you kind of get like two for your money here. They become a little more important. So absolute advantage can be defined as the producer that could produce the most output. What do I mean? So, like, who could produce the most corn? Who could produce the most cars? Who could produce the most computers? That's the country that has the absolute advantage. Or requires the least amount of input. So instead of who could produce the most corn, who could use the least acres to produce a barrel of corn? Who needs the least amount of workers to produce a car? Who needs the least amount of hours? That would be an input. All right. So when you're looking for outputs, you want the country that can produce the most. When you're thinking about inputs for absolute advantage, you want to use the least, right? Now, absolute advantage has zero, nothing to do with trade. Comparative advantage is what drives trade. And comparative advantage is the producer with the lowest opportunity cost. The producer with the lowest opportunity cost. And if I have the lowest opportunity cost in computers, I'm going to specialize, meaning I'm going to make a lot of computers, and I'm going to trade computers. Okay, so countries should trade if they have relatively low opportunity costs. They're going to specialize in the good that is cheaper for them to produce. So again, if I have low opportunity cost in computers, I'm going to trade computers because they're cheaper for me to make. And I'm going to specialize. So I'm going to make enough computers for my country and then for me to trade. Okay, so compare, and I'll show you how you get the comparative advantage in a second. Comparative advantage drives trade. All right, you're going to specialize in the product that you have the comparative advantage. Now, just for us, we're only going to pretend that there's two countries in the world when we do trades. Obviously, there are more. It just simplifies the model for us. So Now, if this is an output, we're saying who can make the most pineapples and the most radios. All right. So that's an output question. Now, if I'm looking for the absolute advantage, I'm looking for the country that can make the most pineapples. That's India, 40 to 30. If I'm looking for the absolute advantage in radios, that's India, 40 to 10. Now, you can have the absolute advantage in both. You cannot have the comparative advantage in both. Okay? So I'm going to repeat that. You can have the absolute advantage like India does in both, but you cannot have the comparative. Now, on an output problem, how do I find the opportunity cost? It's output equal other over. Okay? So and maybe it's easier doing it this way at first. So I want to look at pineapples. So it's an output problem. I'm going to put the other product radios over the pineapples. So that's going to be 10 over 30. Okay. For India, again, for pineapples, I'm going to do the other product India makes, radios, which is 40, and put 40 over 40. I'm looking for the lowest opportunity cost. So Kenya has the lowest. They're going to specialize in pineapples. Now, you cannot have the comparative advantage in both. So I know India has it in radios, but let's just, for practice, do it. Radios, what else can Kenya make? They make pineapples. It's other, pineapples over, so it's 30 over 10, which is going to be 3. And then the other for India is pineapples. 40 over 40 is 1. So again, India has the lowest opportunity cost, and they're going to make radios. Okay. Any questions on that that I just went over? Just type in the chat, or you can turn on your mic if you have a question. All right. Seems like we're good. Okay. All right. Let's go. So here, the other over is a third. Okay. Then if you reverse it, it's 3. Here it's 1 to 1. So a third is lower than 1. So Kenya is going to do pineapples, and India is going to do radios. Okay. So Kenya is going to trade pineapples for radios, and there you go. All right. We'll get into how the trade in a second. Now, this one here is an input. Following chart, it's the number of hours. So we're not saying how much bread or corn could you make. It's the number of hours it takes to produce 1 bread and 1 bushel. It's an input. Input is IOU. Input other goes under. Okay. Now, first, what nation has the absolute advantage in producing bread? Well, let's look. Neither. It's 4 and 4. It's a tie. What nation has the absolute advantage in producing corn? Well, it takes the United States 2 hours to produce a bushel, and it takes France 6. I want to spend less time, so the United States has the absolute advantage in producing corn. I want to just get the chat box back up there. Okay. Now, who has the comparative advantage in producing bread? All right. Now, it's an input, like I said, so we're going to do other under. So, bread, the other product in the United States is corn. And now, because it's an input, I'm going to put it under. So that's 4/2, which is 2. The other for France is corn. I'm going to put it under 4/6 is 2/3. We always want the lowest opportunity cost. So France is going to do bread. Okay. Now, I know the United States then will do corn because you can't have the comparative advantage for both. But again, for practice, let's do it. The other product for corn for the United States is bread. 2/4 is a half. And then you have other under 4 is 1.5. So the United States with the lowest opportunity cost is there. Okay. So the United States is going to produce more corn and trade it to France for bread. All right. Any questions on that? We did an output first, Kenya and India, and then we did an input second. Any questions on this input, how to do the input? Okay. Now, if I was having trouble figuring it out, was it an input or an output question? I would always guess it's an output because 95% of the time, the question will be about output. But I just want to show you both so you could get everyone right. All right. Here's what I want you to do. I've given you 4 scenarios. First, I want you to identify, is it an input or an output question? Second, who has the absolute advantage? Third, who has the comparative advantage? And whoever has the comparative advantage is going to specialize. All right. So, say for the first one, Sarah gives 2 haircuts at 1 perm an hour. Megan gives 3 haircuts at 2 perms. Think about it for 30 seconds and decide is it an input or an output question. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Okay, input or output. Type it in, input or output. Okay, I'm getting output. Yes, because it's how many haircuts or how many perms. Good. Now, if it's an output, I know for the I want the person who can make the most, and it's other over. So here's how I make my chart, right? So I'll let you look at the chart and who has the comparative advantage in perms. I'm not the comparative advantage. Who has the absolute advantage in perms? It's going to be Megan, 2-1. Who has the absolute advantage in haircuts? It's going to be Megan, 3-2. Okay. Now, I just wanted to show you how I'm going to let you figure out the comparative advantage on your own. That's how you put your chart together. That's how you do. So I want to give you like 5 minutes to go through all 4 of these and answer the questions. Who has the first input or output? Who has the absolute? Who has the comparative? And whoever has the comparative is going to specialize. Okay. So I'll give you 5 minutes to do those, and then we'll come back and we'll go over. If you're stuck or anything, feel free to type something in to the chat. Stephen, could you turn on your mic? Because I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Yeah, you said like for input questions, the other goes under and stuff, and I was wondering, is there like a,
Oh, for output, the other goes over. So it's ooh, output equals other over.
okay, thank you.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay,
thank you.
no problem. Okay, I'm going to stop you where you are. We'll go over these. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask me. Um, we're all here just to learn. All right, we did everything except the comparative advantage. Um, so who has the comparative advantage in perms? Anyone? Who has the comparative advantage in perms? Sarah or Megan? I've got everyone Megan. Okay, let's just go through it to make sure we're right with Megan here. Um, okay, so Megan's here. The other for perms is haircuts. So that would be 2/1, which is 2, and that's Sarah rather. And then Megan, the other is haircuts, is 3/2, is 1.5. 1.5 is smaller than 2. So Megan has haircuts, and Megan has perms, and Sarah has haircuts. Okay? All right. Are we good on that? All right. All right, let's go then. We could erase this and go to the next one. All right. So Justin fixes flat tire. Justin and Tim fix flat tires. All right. Who has the absolute advantage in flat tires? Justin or Tim? Absolute. All right. We got Justin 16-14, and no one has brakes 8-8. Who has the who has the comparative advantage in flat tires? Comparative advantage? Okay. It's an output because it's how many flats and how many brakes you should do. So again, it's other over. The other is brakes. So it's 8/16. Justin, which is a half. And for Tim, the other is brakes. It's 8/14, which is greater than a half. So Justin is going to do flat tires, and therefore Tim would do brakes. Okay. All right. What's the third scenario? Hannah takes 30 minutes. All right. So is this an input or output question? Input or output question? What do we got? Input or output? All right. We've got input because it's time. That being said, what are these two? Let me just flash back. What are they doing? Dishes and vacuuming. Okay. Who has the absolute advantage in dishes? I've got Hannah. Okay. No, Kevin has the absolute advantage because it takes him 15 minutes to do dishes while it takes Hannah 30. Remember, in an input, you want to take the least amount of time. Does that make sense? So a lot of you had Hannah. If you have a question, just ask. Who has the absolute advantage for vacuums? Okay. We got Kevin, 45-60. Now, who has the comparative advantage for dish? So in input questions, it's the least amount. No, okay. Stephen, for an input question, it's the least amount of time or the least amount of using the input. For an output question, it's not about time, it's who can make the most product. So if this was an output question, it would be Hannah can make 30 dishes in an hour and vacuum like 60 rooms in an hour. So you'd want to see who could make the most dishes or vacuum the most rooms. That's an output. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you for asking. These get a little confusing. All right. Americans produce, all right. So this is how many computers and what is the V thing here? How many computers and TVs the United States and China make? So, input or output question. First thing we got to ask when we see these, input or output. Okay, you guys are right. It's output. It's how many computers, how many TVs. Who has the comparative advantage in computers? No, sorry. Strike that. Who has the absolute advantage in computers? My fault. Sorry. Who has the absolute advantage in computers? Okay. The United States, America. Who has the absolute advantage in TVs? Okay. United States. You can have the absolute advantage in both. Okay. Who has the comparative advantage in TVs? Comparative advantage in TVs. I got a China. I'm getting China. All right. Let's look. So it's an output. So it's other over. So for the United States, the other number would be 50 over 50, which is 1. So for China, the other would be computers, which is 30 over 40, which is 3/4. So the opportunity cost for China to make TVs is less. So they have the comparative advantage in TVs. And then we know the United States would then have it in computers. So the United States would trade computers to China for TVs. Okay. All right. You guys did really, really good on these. Is there any question on absolute comparative advantage, production possibilities curves, or anything we've done so far today that you would like to ask before we move on to the next thing? Okay. I'm assuming that means we're good. Okay. I will say now, we're talking about supply and demand. We're going to start with demand. If you understand the supply and demand, which is like this one, and then the next, the next week's, econ becomes easy. Like this is the foundation for economics. So if you could get supply and demand down, I'm going to tell you, it's going to make the whole year a lot easier. Now, do some kids struggle with supply and demand at first and it takes them a while? Yes, they still get through it. But man, if you could build yourself a solid foundation here, it helps. What is demand? Demand is the different quantities of goods that consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. So when we're talking about demand, we're talking about the consumer, right? The consumer demands goods, okay? And the demand is, are they willing and able to buy? So do they want the product and do they have the money? Bill Gates is able to purchase a Ferrari. I'm not. So I'm not able to buy it. But if he isn't willing, there's no demand for one. All right. Now, the law of demand. The law of demand states that there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Price and quantity demanded. Because as price goes up, quantity demanded is going to go down. Okay? And we're going to look at, in a second, 3 reasons that is why the law of demand exists. But I'll just pause for a little here in case people are jotting this down to give them time to jot it down. Okay. So here is the law of demand. And I said this: as price falls, quantity demanded rises. As price rises, quantity demanded falls. Okay. Now, why does this occur? There's 3 reasons why this occurs. One is the substitution effect, and I'm going to talk about all of these, okay, in more detail. Second is the income effect. The income effect is very often confused. And the third is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Those are the 3 things that impacts the law of demand. Okay. Now, substitution effect. If the price of Coke goes up, what's going to happen? Some people are still going to buy it, but other people might buy Pepsi. Okay. And that's the substitution effect. If the price goes up for a product, consumers buy less of that product and more of another. So if the price of Coke goes up, people buy less Coke and more Pepsi. And obviously that goes the other way. If the price of Coke goes on sale, people buy more Coke and less Pepsi. That is the substitution effect. Okay. And I think we all know that. And if you have, parents who are very, like, my wife is very sale conscious, and that drives a lot of our decisions. Okay. And that changes the quantity demanded. Second is the income effect. And the reason people confuse this is it has nothing really to do with income. It has to do with purchasing power. So, for example, if I have $10 and a can of Coke costs $1, I could buy 10 cans of Coke. But if it goes to $2, I can only buy 5 cans. So as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down because of my purchasing power. I still only have $10. So I can only buy less. Now, if we do it the other way, at $1, I could buy 10 cans. At 50 cents, I could buy 20. So the income effect is if the price goes down for a product, the purchasing power increases, allowing them to purchase more. And that's what I said, with the 50 cents, I could purchase 20. Now, obviously, it goes the other way too. If the price goes up, my purchasing power goes down. Now, again, the reason I think guys get confused here is it really isn't about income, it's about purchasing power. Okay? So, and by the way, if you're like me and you're like, this is always asked on, like, if you have a unit test, like we're going to have on supply and demand, this is going to be asked, like one of these 3 is always asked. Third thing is the law of diminishing marginal utility, which states, well, the first thing I should say, utility means satisfaction or benefit. Like, how much satisfaction or benefit am I getting out of the product? So I'm really hungry now. If I went, man, like a donut, that like one donut now might be worth $5 to me. The second donut, after the first, I'm not as hungry, maybe 4. And then the third, even less, because then you're starting to fill up or you're getting sick of donuts. So the law of diminishing marginal utility is as you consume more units of any good, the additional satisfaction, and you could put in parentheses, benefit from each additional unit will eventually start to decrease. All right. So the law of diminishing marginal utility states that as you start to buy more and more donuts, your satisfaction will eventually decrease. Okay. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to talk to you a little about a demand curve. The demand curve is downward sloping. Just think D, downward, demand, downward sloping. And we already talked that it has an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. And we talked about why. It's those three reasons, right? Substitution effect, income effect, law of diminishing marginal utility. All right. When reading a demand curve, assume all out income. All right. So everything is held constant, meaning the demand curve is there, and unless they tell you, there is no other changes. Okay. So here is a demand curve for cereal. So all I'm going to do is plot $5, $10, $4, $20, $3, $30. And when you do that, when you plot this demand schedule, you get a curve like this. So when you're graphing, all you need to do is put a P on the axes, a Q on the axes. Okay, you don't have to write quantity, cereal, or price. You can put P and Q. And then for the downward demand curve, all you really have to do is put a D. But you have to put the P, the Q, and the D. Okay, and that's how you get your downward sloping demand curve. All right, now to shift the curve like we did in production possibilities curve. All right, we call it a change in demand, a shift in demand. Okay, so all things are held constant except thing shift. So a shift means at that same price, more people are willing and able to purchase the good. Okay, this is a change in demand, not a change in quantity demand. And I'll go over the differences there. But a change in demand means, or a shift in demand, or an increase or decrease in demand means the whole curve is shifting. Changes in price don't shift the curve. All right, that's important. Change in price gets you to slide up and down the curve. And we'll go over that. We'll have examples. So, what if cereal makes you smarter? All right. Well, if cereal makes you smarter, more people would buy it at $5, $4, $3, $2, because people are going to run out and buy it. So, how do we show that? Okay. First of all, look at your schedule. Notice at every price, more people are now buying cereal, okay, because it makes you smarter. All right. Now I graph it by putting an arrow to show it's moving in that direction, the downward sloping, and then if this is D1, I could go to D2. If this was D, I could have made it D1. All right. And that's it. All right. That's a shifter. And that would be like, and we'll get into shifters like taste and preference. Like people are going to want cereal because it's going to make you smarter. The price didn't change. At every price, people wanted more. Okay. So it wasn't like they lowered the price so people bought cereal. No, at $5, people wanted it more, at 4, at 3, at every price. That's a change in demand. That's a shift in demand. That's an increase in demand. That's the terminology for that. Okay? Now, what if cereal causes baldness? Well, most people don't want to be bald. So what's going to happen? At every price, the demand for cereal is going to decrease. And look at my schedule. It went from 10 to 0, 20 to 5, 30. Okay. So now I'm going to shift the other way. Arrow left, D2. Okay. Again, notice there was no change in price of cereal. At every level, at every price, people wanted less cereal, decrease in the demand for cereal. Now, I'm going to just take this away for a second. If cereal went from $5 to $3, you would just slide down. The curve wouldn't shift. And that would be a change in quantity demand. People at $5 want 10, at $3, they'd want 30. That's a change in quantity demand because only at that one specific price was there a change. Okay. Now, here we go. What if the price of milk goes up? How does that affect cereal? Well, they're like complements, right? You need milk for cereal. So if the price of milk goes up, people are going to buy less milk, therefore use less cereal. All right. All right. What gets the curves to shift? There are 5 things. All right. They're called determinants or shifters. They are the only thing, like the 4 things for production possibility: change in quantity, quality of resources, change in technology, change in human resources, change in capital stock. Those are the only 4 things that could shift that curve. These are the only 5 things that could shift the demand curve. I remember them with timer. So the first, taste and preferences. That was like the baldness, right? That was kind of people get smarter. That's taste and preference. 2, income. If income increases in the United States, people have more money, they're going to demand more products. If income decreases in the United States, people have less money, they're going to demand less products. Market size. If, like Under Armour started out as just a Maryland company, then they became a Northeast company. Then they became the United States. So as that market size increases, the demand for Under Armour increases. Expectations. If I expect the price of cars to go down next month, the demand for cars today will decrease. Because why am I going to buy a car today if in a month from now I know they're going to go on sale? That's expectations. And related goods are both substitutes and complements. I showed you a complement with milk and cereal. We will talk about substitutes also. These are the only 5 things that shift the curve. Notice none of them say about a change in price of that product. All right. All right. Demand is very important. Is there any questions? Anything you could be confused about at this time?
I had a question about the substitution.
Yes, sure.
What if you can't substitute it, like gas, for example? If the price goes up, it's not like you're going to buy another car. What would happen?
Okay. No, that's an excellent question. Gas is what they call an inelastic good, meaning if price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, but very little. So you're right, you're not going to buy another car, but you might carpool. some people might walk, some people might take like mass transportation. So, but most people are still going to drive and pay more money. So quantity demanded would go down very little, but it would still go down. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, that's an excellent question. And that's something I don't think we'll get into in the summer, but the topic is elasticity. Like something like gas is very inelastic because you're right, there are no good substitutes. Where something like soda is very elastic because there's tons of substitutes. So great question there. Okay, anyone else? Okay. See what we got on next. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think we're gonna actually end at this point because this is a good thing. We got through the shifters. What we'll do next week is we'll come back to the shifters and we'll work on examples on when to shift the curves. Okay. And we'll also talk about supply. And like I said, if you got supply and demand down, this unit, it really is the foundation for the rest of the class. Okay. All right. I thank you guys for your time. I appreciate that you're stopping in. And I also recorded this. I'll send out the recording later. Okay. If you don't have any questions, you're free to go. If you have any questions, feel free to turn on your mic or put them in the chat box. I'll hang out here for a minute or two.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Breslow.
Thank you. And again, 11:30 now.